years writing erotica in the sort of supernatural sort of end of it, supernatural and horror, which is of course how we met through our amazing conventions that we go to. But I have recently switched, because I used to write horror on the side. I am now doing developmental work freelance for a gaming company, so I'm writing for them full time at the moment.
Wow. Right. So that's. I've got a horrible habit with notes of writing down the first word and then not the rest, and then not know. So supernatural and erotica. Is there an overlap between supernatural and the erotica in what readers expect? I mean, to my mind, I'm just thinking there's the fantasy aspect that with erotica, we expect an idealized sexual relationship between a couple. And yeah, you've got sort of like the fantasy aspect of the supernatural. Or is it just being cynical and having never had a real romantic relationship?
Right. I see. Sorry. Yeah. No, the question took me by surprise. Okay. So, yeah. I'm much more on the gritty side of fantasy. Let's put it that way. I know that there are people who write. You can write erotic fantasy and use it as an excuse for basically doing anything you like, but my horror and my fantasy work tends to be really sort of grounded in, hopefully grounded psychologically and grounded physically, and there's nothing terribly idealistic about my erotica, let's put it that way. My erotica is all about struggle and dealing with power imbalances, and usually sort of escaping from horrible situations, and how sex sort of reflects on that in the world. So I will use the fantasy. What I do is I use it to set up a perilous and troubling situation, and see how that takes me with the plot of the and the actual erotic side.
Brilliant. So supernatural erotica, going into horror, and then developmental work for gaming. What sort of gaming? Are you allowed to talk about it?
Yeah, I can. Yes, I'll explain this. Okay, so I work for a company called Chaosium at the moment. They have been publishing for a game called Call of Cthulhu for the last 40 years. So it's a really old one. It's a tabletop role-playing game in the style of Dungeons and Dragons. If all your students have heard of that, obviously they're not all as old as me. But it's very much horror based. It's based in this world. It's based on the writings of a guy called H.P. Lovecraft. And here we go. This is the rule book, not small.
Wow.
Full of monsters and things. This is how you run the games. And so it's sitting around chatting to people over a table. And as well as the main rule set, they publish a lot of different stories for it, scenarios for it, and different settings. So you can run it in the past, in the Middle Ages, you can run it back in the Roman times. One of the things they have published in the past is called Cthulhu by Gaslight. So it's all set in the Victorian period, late Victorian period, 1890s. And they've decided they're going to re-release this, and they wanted to make it bigger and better and more detailed. And basically they dumped all the files in my lap and gave me a bag of books on Victorian history, and they said go for it. So that's what I have been doing. I have been writing.
You lucky bastard.
I know. It is absolutely my dream job. It is my dream come true, working for Chaosium and writing historical stuff. It's just
So that means that you've got sort of like all the H.P. Lovecraft stuff that you would be throwing into Call of Cthulhu. With it being the 1890s London, throw Jack the Ripper in there and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Wow.
All sorts of stuff people just are not generally aware of, terrible crimes and horrors, and as the superstitions of the time, because fairy lore, for example, was still very much alive, sort of in the so-called Celtic fringe at the time. Or you can pull in the whole mythology of Britain into this thing.
You'd written a book about fairy lore previously, hadn't you?
Oh yes, I wrote. Have been writing naughty novels about very bad.
Right. So yeah, I'm gonna keep this quick because your time is valuable. Right. What's your writing schedule?
My writing schedule, I'm not a morning worker. Oh my gosh, no. So yeah, I work afternoons and evenings. So in the morning's just sort of basically powering up, going on Facebook, checking all the news, and generally being paranoid about the real world. And then I shift into the writing in the afternoon.
That's actually an interesting point that you raised there. And I'm going to keep going off on tangents just because that's the sort of irritating bastard I am. But do you actually find, especially now, that the paranoia that we get from looking at the news, does that impinge on your writing in any way? Does that hamper your creativity when you look at the news and sort of like think, well, bills are going up, there's the chance of a third world war, poor Boris has been sacked and we're all very worried about it. I couldn't even say that with a straight face. But yeah, do any of these worries sort of like stop you from being able to get on with your writing?
Not those ones in particular. I have found things that have impinged on me in the past. Well, for example, there's sort of shift away from erotica due to just a lot of the problems in the publishing world. It's so difficult. You put something up on Amazon and they take a dislike to just a few words in your blurb, or somebody flags it up with a complaint or something like that, and just it's very precarious is erotica in the publishing world. And a lot of my publishers in the past, even big ones, big romance publishers and stuff, have struggled and gone under. So yeah, I find that quite depressing. And the sort of sideways move in my career, I think, came at the right moment.
Definitely, especially since as you are working in the 1890s with H.P. Lovecraft, yeah.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, he's the last word in nihilism and existential dread, isn't he? I mean, he'll just say, "Ha ha ha, wars." Yeah, what's that to worry about compared to what lies within these mighty tomes?
Yeah, compared to Dagon coming back. Which is most important to you? Is it plot or character?
Short answer, plot. Long answer, plot and character are both important. They interact with each other. Obviously, character drives plot, and character is formed by things that happen to people, and it is brought out, and it becomes apparent through events. But personally, what's important for me is setting. I can read books like like A Suitable Boy, which very little plot happens. It's an enormous tome. It's set in India. It's about arranged marriages. It's a fantastic book. It's the setting that grabs me. Or Titus Groan, for example, in the sort of fantasy realm. It's an enormous fantasy novel. Very little happens in the first book, but the writing and the characters in it are terrific. So, I would say setting over everything else.
Yeah.
You've got to grab me with the setting, and the others I can take or leave.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from there. Setting is so damned important, and I think that was one of the things that I enjoyed with the George R.R. Martin stories. The whole setting, it was where it was set. It was his descriptions of some of the meals that I found.
He's obsessed with food, isn't he?
Yeah, but it's such nice food. You can't. Oh, I'm just going to show you before I forget. I got a present of a cookbook from one of my students.
Oh, that's so you.
Yeah, which
Can
is.
you cook?
Well, I'm not going to get any complaints if I cook those meals. Right. So, what piece of writing advice would you give to anybody who's just starting
out? Okay, so read consciously. When you're reading what you like, look at why you like it. What is it about particular sentences? Look at the structure of the language. Look at what works in a description for you, or where you start getting lost. So read consciously and read around. If you're writing in a genre, for crying out loud, read other stuff. You know, if you're writing fantasy, don't just stick to reading fantasy. You know, read almost any other genre as well, because all these things inform your worlds that you are creating, and inform the sort of structures of the stories that you'll be writing. Read non-fiction, really important. You've got to know about the world to write about the world. So, you know, I read a lot of non-fiction. You know, even, you know, sort of historical settings, you need to read about the history. If you want to know about other cultures, you need to read about them, and read travel logs. You know, read it. It'll tell you how people interact in sort of situations that you can't imagine yourself, because it's outside your normal sort of knowledge zone. Read around. So yeah, read consciously and read around.
Yeah, I can't
echo. Oh, and when it comes to writing, don't let anything stop you. If you think it's crap, it doesn't matter. If other people say it's crap, it doesn't matter. You've got to keep writing, because the only way you're going to get better is writing more.
Yeah, and also if somebody does say that your writing's crap, the first thing you should do is say, show me some of your writing. Let's see how good yours is, Mr. fucking high and mighty judge. Yeah. But that's right, isn't it? I mean, I've had people, I've had people tell me that my writing's crap, and yeah, they might think that they're entitled to. But yeah, I know when I've written something good. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. And you know, even if you aren't sure what you've written is good, it's another step to something that will be better. The only way you can get better at writing is to carry on with it, even when you're not completely, you know, certain of yourself. We've all got insecurities. I mean, we all have imposter syndrome, I think, at some point or another. So you just keep going despite it. Don't listen to the little voice in your head.
I've stopped listening to most of them now. Keris, who do you read for pleasure?
Like I said, I read a lot of non-fiction, but for pleasure, Matt Wesolowski at the moment. That's who I will always buy one of his new books. He's a horror writer. Have you read his stuff? He writes the 6 Stories series. Okay, so he's British, Matt Wesolowski. And what his books are structures as transcripts of podcasts.
Right.
So there's this fictional podcast which is chewing over old mysteries, and there's 6 podcasts in the series covering a mystery. So you're reading through, it's just people talking and dialogue and sort of narration by this podcaster, and each one of the 6 episodes throws a different angle on the thing, and it just keeps flipping it around and twisting it's got supernatural connotations, but sort of quite ambiguous ones. I just think they're really clever books, and I love them.
Right, you just sold me on them. Yeah, I know what I'm going to be downloading and listening to at the gym next week. Right, so you've written horror RPG scenarios for tabletop games companies. How does that differ from writing fiction that's typically consumed as a novel or short story?
Ooh, right, okay, so when you're writing a scenario, you're very conscious of your audience. They come first, as it were. When you're writing fiction, you can write in your own voice, and you can write what you like, and you can play with your readers. You can lead them down the wrong path. You can sort of lie to them and trick them and stuff like that. You haven't quite got that authorial voice with writing scenarios, because what you're doing is you're basically mentoring the person who will run the game. So you're writing for the person who runs the game, the keeper.
Right.
And you are saying, this is how the story plays out. And you're trying to do everything you can to help them run this for their players. So you've got to be clear. There's got to be no surprises. You've got to be generous. You've got to try and think around all the problems they might come across. And so you're talking to them, as like a Jedi to a Padawan. You are showing them how to run this scenario. And within that, under that layer is the stuff you are writing for the players, which is where all the horror and the fiction comes in. And for them, you are writing this gripping mystery / investigation / horrible event that is supposed to frighten them. So for them, there should be surprises and terrors and mysteries, and they shouldn't know what's going on perhaps until the end. So you're writing at two different levels. And for the players, the sort of bottom level, you've got to make it fun. You've got to make it interactive. You've got to give them autonomy so that what they do affects the plot. So you've got to be, you can't just railroad them down your plot, how you want this story to look when they play it. They have to have choice and control to some extent. So it's not like writing fiction. You're taking a step back and you're saying, okay, this is my baby, and now this is how you can play it and how you can interact with it.
This sounds like such a completely different thing from writing a novel or a short story. So you're having to write basically a non-fiction interpretation of the fiction that you've created.
That's right. Right.
And that's for the dungeon master to reinterpret it for the players. You've also got to write the parts for the players for them to. Wow, what a skill set!
Yeah.
Yeah. That's. Thank you, because I do have students who are interested in doing RPG things, and yeah, that's an insight that I would never have been able to give them. Thank you. So you've successfully written horror and erotica. Do you feel? I've asked you if there's some overlap between those two genres, so I will. So you wrote the Book of the Watchers trilogy for Sinful Press. What sort of challenges do you face as an author when you're writing a trilogy?
Oh, okay. Well, that's an interesting one for me because I am not a plotter. I do not plot ahead.
Why? What's wrong with you?
Fight. So I use the headlight means of writing a book, which I don't know whether you've covered it. There's a quote that writing is like driving a car at night. So you can only see as far as your headlights go, but you can make the entire journey that way. So,
right, yes,
it's a sort of intuitive way of writing. You might have, you know where you're going, where you start, you set off, and you see what happens. And it's slower than plotting, and I'll give you that for nothing. And it involves a lot of going back through what you've written, and because something that happens 3 chapters on might throw a new light on what was said before, and you might have to sort of add something in. It's a lot of it is about trusting your the process, trusting your own imagination, trusting your not so much your active imagination as your subconscious. When the story comes to life, it will start to write itself, because the characters or the plot, the logic will start to fall into place, and the interactions will start to create its own momentum. So that's the headlight method of writing. Now, if you've got a trilogy, you got a bit of a problem there, because you've basically got 3 acts, and you've got to make sure that they all work together, because you can write one, send it off, and then you're writing the second one, and you might think, oh hell, I shouldn't have said that in the first book. So it gives you constraints. You can't break what you did in the beginning, but you might be able to twist it on its head and make a new revelation out of it. So got to be careful. If I'd been a plotter and I could have plotted all 3 books out to start with, it might have made things a bit easier, but it just made it a bit more of a challenge doing it the way I did it.
Yes, I suppose once you finish book 1 and send that to the publisher, there's no retconning anything that happened.
That's right.
Yeah. See, this is why you need to plot things. It's just, Excel spreadsheets, a writer's best friend.
No, I did have an outline. As I say, I knew where it started, where it was ending. I knew it was in 3 acts. So, and it was this particular trilogy, the Book of the Watchers, it's all about angels, fallen angels, and set in the modern world. And it's a romance, so I needed 3 acts. So basically, the first act will be how the main couple get together. The second act is what tears them apart, and the third act is the resolution. And so I knew I had that structure in my head.
But that's all I knew. So, as we mentioned before, you're currently working on historical horror. Yes?
Yes, that's right.
How much of your skills as a writer and your knowledge of audience do you find you're using in this role?
I am using every skill I have. I mean, when they gave me this project, I was basically I spent the last year and whatever it has been, I've just been immersed in it. I've been reading Victorian fiction. I read Frankenstein for the first time. That's a confession. I should have read it a long time ago. Been reading the Victorian writers. I've been doing research. I've been poring over maps. I've been creating plans for houses and institutions. I've had to write guides to London and a gazetteer of British folklore, and it's all. So every skill, all the research skills, and the ability to stick things together with logic, that's come into it. And then on top of that, it's all, sort of, what can I do that's really awful to these characters or this situation? How could it be worse if there's some sort of occult thing going on in the background?
This isn't a question that I'd sent through to you, and if you think it's inappropriate, I can cut it out. But with a lot of what you're working on now being based around Lovecraft, do you find that any of Lovecraft's racism is something that you have to edit out of these stories?
Okay, so Call of Cthulhu has changed a lot over the years, and they're very much, they accept that Lovecraft was a racist. It is not part of the game.
Yeah.
We have a modern audience, you know, there's just no way would we do that sort of thing. So there's quite a lot more emphasis now on not just sort of assuming that everybody is a white male who is trudging off into the jungle and finding primitive tribesmen worshipping dark gods.
Yes.
Which is what a lot of old school Lovecraft was. And it's a lot more about just decentering that sort of that viewpoint, and being aware of the realities of, say, colonialism, or you know, sort of how oppression drives people to do bad things and make terrible alliances with or terrible choices. So I think, you know, sort of modern Lovecraftian fiction is changing. We're getting a lot of non-white viewpoints on the stories nowadays, and people are writing their own versions which center women and people of color a lot more.
Excellent. Final question for you, Keris. What are you currently working on, and where can we find more of your work?
You will have to wait. The stuff I'm working on at the moment, I am working on developing, editing a book of scenarios. So it's 6 short stories for gaming for this game. And I'm just busy tidying it up now before I go off on holiday to the former Soviet Union. So it better be done because I may never come back. So yeah, and I guess the stuff I've been working on will start to come out, I'm hoping, next year. It's all going through the sort of illustration and tidying up process now.
Excellent. I will be putting a link to your website underneath this anyway, so people can find a link to you and can start following you on social media. But Keris, thank you so much for your time.
Fantastic to see you again, Ashley.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.